Hello, welcome back to what's been a very long night in the arena. You're gonna notice some very different things about this video. One of them is that the video is kind of gonna play, and it's gonna be a lot different from how I normally would talk and do a video at the same time. Here's why. I made a video. I was really stoked about how it turned out, really happy with it. And then at the very end, I went to play it back. Guess what? Yeah, you probably guessed it by now. No audio. So, you're gonna get, for the first time ever in my experience, you're gonna get me, CGB, talking over myself. Turning down some of the music in my own headphones so I can hear myself speak just fine. So this is going to be interesting. Basically right there I'm showing you the deck and I'm saying here's what we're going to do today. We're going to go play an event. I'm actually going to put 500 bucks, 500 golds up, not bucks, 500 gold up and enter a quick constructed event. And I think that by doing that we can do a little bit more extra grinding today, earn some extra cards as long as we can get to 4 wins or better with our budget blue deck and see how we close out the week. There's also some banter about me telling you that tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon I'm going to be out of the house, going to the movies and going to see my newborn nephew and my sister in the hospital, as well as some Chinese buffet. So a big day all the way around, but that means I won't be here to record the video in the morning, which means I'm up here late at night on a Thursday getting it done for you. So here we are looking at our hand. The main considerations are whether or not to risk some kind of a removal spell by playing the Siren Stormtamer, or whether or not to play out the Departed Deckhand. And I decide that I've got a good initiative here against mono blue, and I'd rather play the Deckhand at risk and not risk something weird along the lines of a unsummon or spell pierce and protect my Curious Obsession. And then our opponent makes the first kind of oddball choice of the night with a Lava Coil, 4 damage, but to the unblockable Herald, which kind of is weird. It puts us in a bit of a bind because we can't put the Curious Obsession on the Departed Deckhand. If we do that, the Deckhand will die. So I just have to attack in there, get our damage in, and I decided to chart a course rather than try to play another creature. And then with the island, I go for a Siren Stormtamer. So if I untap with a Stormtamer and I draw another island, I can protect the Tempest Djinn. But now that I have a dive down, I'm also thinking about whether or not I want to put Curious Obsession on Stormtamer. I don't love putting Curious Obsession on Stormtamer. I like being able to sacrifice Stormtamer to protect other threats. But now that I've drawn a second Curious Obsession, the plot thickens. And it's all about, do we think, how many removal spells do we think our opponent has that do enough damage, like Lava Coil and Lightning Strike? We already saw one Lava Coil. So I decided to move in on this Stormtamer and send in the crew with a dive down to protect the Stormtamer. Drawing 2 cards later and passing the turn back to the opponent, I'm very relieved that they have absolutely nothing, and sort of bamboozled by it myself. The other thing I was thinking about is if they have Essence Scatter, which counts as a creature spell, playing 2 Curious Obsessions around that might prove very good. So here we are moving in again. What I really want to see off the top are some lands to keep up on my land drops. We also have a quest to play enough lands we get 750 gold. So we do hit the land, we have 7 cards in hand, and we can leave up Merfolk Trickster and Wizard's Retort if we want, as well as dive down to protect our Stormtamer. But after looking at it and examining all the options of different ways to play out here into all this open mana, I'm still thinking that Essence Scatter is probably my opponent's top card, and I go with just a little play in Merfolk Herald while keeping dive down, Merfolk Trickster, and Wizard's Retort all open. And our opponent goes for a Chemist's Insight, which has no impact on the board on their main phase, which is a pretty big sign of weakness, and they concede right after. So whatever hand they had is a tad bit slow. That also may be a shame scoop, as they say when you make a bad mistake. If our opponent had the Chemist's Insight but didn't play it on their end step, and instead click through to their turn, well, there you go. Alright, drop the... I don't know if there was like an echo from the game there at all, but I'm going to just take it down just in case. There were some weird things going on with the levels, and while my microphone was muted, the game wasn't necessarily muted. Still, the game sound was for the most part inaudible, so I decided to go with music instead, but for some reason right there it seemed like it picked up, so I turned it down. Alright, here we are. We open on the play, we have a Tamer and a Curious Obsession against an island, right where you want to be. Nothing you can complain about there. But oh, I remember now what happens this game. Do you like lands? I show off my incredible ability to draw far more lands than seems reasonable. But the opponent on just 2 islands here doesn't have... They play a Merfolk Trickster, and the idea here is to tap my Stormtamer and take away its ability and then block it with the Merfolk Trickster. But instead of allowing that to happen, I tap their Merfolk Trickster so that while my Stormtamer doesn't draw me a card because it loses its abilities, including the card draw ability and the flying ability, we can't let the Trickster block it. Humana comes down and reveals that it's a Merfolk deck and is one of the scariest cards you can see from Merfolk. But then our opponent, with an odd play, attacks with the Trickster. The more Merfolk you have with Humana, the better it is. So I'm very happy to trade and get rid of their Merfolk and make it harder for their Humana to go off. Here we are. The cards off the top keep on coming. I choose to hold my Curious Obsession in my hand rather than play it out in case my opponent does find Unsummon or something like that. Our opponent plays a Deeproot Elite, comes in with Humana, and now is the moment of fear, because what I'm afraid of is that my opponent has another Merfolk Trickster, the card we already lost down here. With 2 blue open, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I am 100% sure is coming my way, is another Merfolk Trickster. But I decide that there's just not a better play for me right now, and I decide to double suit up, double pants up the Stormtamer and just go for it. And I'm rewarded. There is no Trickster. It was all a figment of my imagination, and we draw 2 very important cards. I play the other Stormtamer because it can protect my Stormtamer from an Unsummon or something like that, and I play the Deckhand as well and save the Tempest Djinn for another turn. The opponent with a land looks like they probably badly needed another fish there and were unable to draw it. But now our opponent's facing 6 unblockable damage, not to mention a Tempest Djinn on call here. We play another Stormtamer in case our opponent has more targeted effects that they would play during combat. And in come the critters. No blocks once again. Our first 2 opponents, it must be said, for being blue-red and for being blue-green, pretty weak hands, not a lot of interaction, or we were able to just get through the interaction that they did offer. And now Tempest Djinn comes down. We save the Curious Obsession till our turn, though we could have enchanted it there if we wanted to. It just plays around some bounce effect or lockdown effect like a Water Trap Weaver. Our opponent with their 3 Merfolk decide to take a draw step, find another land, and the fish deck packs it in from there. As we see, we're closing in on quest, 50 gold in the bag, 2 wins to the good. Budget Blue is cooking at this point. And on to the next game. I should have grabbed a water bottle. I'm actually down here with no liquid refreshment, planning to talk over the entirety of this video, which I already know how long it is. You may get a different side of CGB. Watching myself play is a lot like listening to myself talk. Sometimes it's not the funnest. And when I look at this hand in particular, I'm very much like, well, I've got 1 creature. This is so bad if I'm against red. It's so bad if I'm against removal. But maybe Chart of Course can get me there, And if we're against another creature deck that isn't really fast, maybe I can sit back on an Essence Scatter and play around other creatures. Then I think I proceed to just take none of my own advice and play far too aggressively on some of these turns. But that's spoilers. That's getting ahead of myself. So on end step, we offer a Trickster. An opponent shows what they're into, which is Sinister Sabotage, which I'm pretty surprised to see on a Merfolk Trickster, especially on end step. And they put a negate into their graveyard. So we draw, but we draw no land, which means we just sit back and take the same route as last time, trying to play Merfolk Trickster on their end step, and then hopefully open ourselves up for Chart a Course. But what ends up happening is the mana constraints leave my lines very sketchy. If our opponent has good creatures here, for example, can I really attack and Chart a Course if I'm not hitting lands? It's a very tough call. The opponent saves their cast down until we're in the attack step, which leaves me believing I can Chart a Course, hit a land, and play a Siren Stormtamer. I think the odds are pretty good for it, so I take that line. Of course, we get pretty punished when the land is not there, and now the discard decision is pretty difficult. I really want my creatures, I really want my Curious Obsessions, I really want my counterspells. I think somewhere towards the end, I was choosing between discarding a Curious Obsession, a Departed Deckhand, but I eventually think I go with the Chart a Course, saying that I just can't afford to have another turn like this one, where I'm spending my mana to draw cards but make no board progress. So, it takes me a minute to come around. They're basically all my children. I want all of them with me. I want all the cards to succeed and come along for the ride. Thought Erasure. This is the most puzzling thing that my opponent does in the game, because after digging in and trying to think of what to do with this Thought Erasure, we basically have a hand of 7 with a lot of decent cards, any one of which can be a serious problem. And it really kind of dictates how the game goes from here, because the leftovers are what my opponent has to play around. They pick Siren Stormtamer, possibly thinking that its ability to counter removal spells is what they most need to fear. So now I'm thinking, well, my opponent almost certainly has a counter spell like Essence Scatter or another Cast Down. What do I want to lose, or do I just want to pass and keep counter magic available? I decide that keeping counter magic open is playing their game, giving them more draw steps to find more powerful cards, which I expect their deck to have based on the Sinister Sabotage to cast down the Thought Erasure. Usually control decks have big powerful finishers like Doom Whisperer, but I decide I don't want to throw something into a removal spell as powerful as a Tempest Djinn, which is the best creature in my deck. So I lead out with Departed Deckhand, expecting it to die. Like, certain it's gonna die. I'm just absolutely positive something is going to kill this Departed Deckhand. And an Eldest Reborn certainly does that. So Deckhand down, but our opponent only has 2 cards left. And now, as I think about whether or not I can sit back and try to play counterspells, or whether I have to let my opponent use their Eldest Reborn to eventually tick up and start taking over the game, I decide I absolutely have to put out the Tempest Djinn and get into and pressure the opponent. Make them have another removal spell. If you could hear my commentary, I'm absolutely sure this Tempest Djinn is going to die and this game is going to end. But then my opponent throws me a curveball in Vampire Sovereign, a card I didn't expect to play against. And honestly, the first budget-looking card our opponents played. If that had been a Doom Whisperer, for example, this game would have gone completely differently. But as soon as I see that Sovereign, and I draw the land that allows me to go Curious Obsession, and have Wizard's Retort up, I just go all in on my Tempest Djinn. And the opponent chump blocks. Then, with their Eldest Reborn, after a good amount of thought, they do decide to get their Sovereign back for another round of chump blocking and Game Drain. But the fact is, they have to kill this Tempest Djinn. And if they can't kill or trade with the Tempest Djinn, it's going to run away with the game eventually. Every time it hits the opponent, I draw 2 cards. Not to mention it cracks for at least 7 right now. And here is the Sovereign. And now our opponent, in their hand, play, even more stunning to me, another Sovereign, showing how much they like the card. I decide I have to counter it, because if I don't, the 2 can gang up and block the Djinn, whereas 1 by itself can't do it. And then I top deck like a boss with an Exclusion Mage that returns that Sovereign to the owner's hand and lets me get 7 points to the dome, drawing 2 cards. Ooh, I get a quiver just thinking back to how this game worked out when I thought for sure that I was a removal spell away from certain death. Playing our land and a chart, of course, to stock up even more, we see a Siren Stormtamer, and we play it, hoping that our opponent can't top deck another removal spell so the Stormtamer can protect our Djinn from now on. The opponent draws another land. They replay the Sovereign, but I don't even mind the drain right now because we're getting so far ahead with every attack step. Dive Down shows up. Opt puts a land on the bottom and draws into an Essence Scatter, and now I can definitely feel it. Everybody attacks because if the opponent doesn't block the Djinn, I get to draw 2 cards. So that's the chump block, and now the opponent needs a big draw. Instead, just another land off the top, and I believe they pack it. Yep, they pack it in right there. Can't blame them at all. Pretty nasty flood down the stretch. And the Sovereign was definitely not able to carry the day from the Tempest Djinn. So 750 gold, a reward for Runner. Maybe we'll play some vampires, and we save that pack for later. We move on to our 3rd win and head into game 4. And at this point, I'm really excited because we only need 1 win to break even, plus have a few extra cards on top of it, which is a pretty good day at the grind. But when I look at my hand, that is by far the worst hand I have had on the day, and it's got to go. You really can't keep a hand like that. Even if I drew a Curious Obsession off the top, it would have too many lands and just be too weak. Now here's a decision I regret. I wish I'd bottomed the chart, of course. I was looking at my hand thinking I could almost certainly come out the aggressor with such a great turn 1 Herald, turn 2 Stormtamer, and somewhere in there Curious Obsession as well as Essence Scatter to counter a spell. But it turns out I'm on the draw. Not only that, I'm on the draw against red, which turns that chart, of course, from a pretty good value play into a serious liability. I lead out with the Mist-Cloaked Herald, and my opponent with a Gitu Lava Runner is already, when I see them reading, I'm already thinking they're pointing damage at it, but instead they play an Instigator. And here comes their Lava Runner, which I'm not going to block. So off the top, it's Curious Obsession, number 2. And it's, oh my gosh, it's such a decision. I could play the Siren Stormtamer, and then next turn I could play 1 Curious Obsession and have protection for my Herald, but that's all going too slow against a red deck that's quite likely to race me. Also, playing the Stormtamer is just death against Goblin Chain Whirler. I just lose both my creatures and the game's over. I decide that what I want to do is double up on Mist-Cloaked Herald and make my opponent have exactly a Lightning Strike or Wizard's Lightning. If they don't have it, I get so far ahead it's ridiculous. If they do have it, I still sort of got my money back, and they had to use a burn spell on my Herald and not my face. So it's a pretty tough call, and the opponent has a great turn with a Runaway Steamkin and a Wizard's Lightning to take out the Herald. At this point, I am down 4 creatures on the board and 3 lands to 2 lands and nothing. And to say it looks bad is an understatement. I do draw the land, which is very important to letting me continue to cast my spells and keep up. I play a Stormtamer and I say go. My opponent goes for a Rekindling Phoenix, which is just a mega curve topper, and I'm super happy I have the Essence Scatter available to take it out. But when you look at that board and your blue tempo, you're already thinking that this game is over. Because of that, on this attack, I decide to play, I would say, maybe too conservative. I go for a block and a trade that isn't necessarily my favor, but with my opponent having 1 card left, and to me, my most important resource being my life, I decide to go for it. So then I draw, and I even called it. I said that I need to draw Tempest Djinn to get back in the game when I was blocking with the Stormtamer, and I do. 4 toughness is a real house. I decide to go for it, and the only problem, of course, is any red spell, and the Runaway Steamkin still hits me. And there is 1 more red spell from the opponent, but as you're about to see, the opponent gets fast and loose, attacking with everything. I would have only attacked with the Steamkin and saved my other creatures, so they gave me a free block on their Lava Runner. Yes, I fall down to 6, but now I have 4 cards in hand, and their creatures are pretty small. So I still hate that play, and watching it, I'm still not sure what my opponent is thinking other than all face, the only place all day. Now we're thinking about holding up Essence Scatter, Merfolk Trickster. Do we want to chart a course and try to improve our hand? I'm also thinking about if I chart a course, I might hit an island. An island would let my Tempest Djinn trade with the Steamkin, but I decided to go with a Siren Stormtamer and a pass and my Merfolk Trickster. My opponent draws, and I don't know how to explain it, but they go for, in the main phase, like at the start of the attack phase instead of during the attack phase, a Sure Strike, +3/+0 and first strike till end of turn on the Lava Runner. And you can just feel that the red player is being so impulsive and just thinking only about getting in for damage and not the timing of their spells or even whether or not to save any permanents. And so I'm thinking about, do I tap this down? Do I ambush it? And I decide to tap it down and keep it from attacking at all, so I have an extra blocker. And then what does my opponent do? What do? They push with everything again. I decide to double block the Steamkin and put the Trickster in front of the 1/1. And this should leave me with a Trickster and a Stormtamer versus a Lava Runner. But look at the way the opponent orders damage. They order the Siren Stormtamer first, and the Djinn is still alive. I can't even explain it. I can't begin to wonder. I think about getting in with Djinn for the better clock and then trading the Trickster for the Lava Runner, but I decided to send the Trickster instead and keep back the Djinn. Even if the opponent has a removal spell and the Lava Runner to trade for the Djinn, they still get 2 for 1, and I get 2 cards from drawing with the Chart a Course, as well as I have an Essence Scatter to cover their next creature. So my plan is, even if they attack, I'm going to block. I might lose my Djinn for it, but the opponent just scoops it up, and it might well be a shame concession at that point, because I don't like the way that they played the game, and I think that they were so far ahead they could have won it with a little more careful resource management, and I'm grateful to get out of that one alive at a 4-0. The red deck is always a serious test, especially on the mulligan and on the draw. A little volume adjustment, as well as a little break for my vocals. I hope everybody out there, well, I don't have to say I hope. I'm glad everybody out there is enjoying the Young CGB series. One thing I talk about in this video is the name. I got the name, I'm really just as if I were to take myself with what I know and go back and be a young player again, like I was when I first found Magic, a free-to-play player on a budget, just using the cards I opened in a starter deck. To play with my friends. How would I use the lessons all the things I know about Magic now and apply it to that situation? Some people have taken the Young CGB title to mean it's for like young people, that the series is only for very, very young people. But no, it's for players who are getting their start in Arena. It's a young Arena account, you could say. I've had some people say the name is cringy. I'm open to suggestions about a different name. I'm not married to the name. I could definitely change it, but I also couldn't come up with anything better off the top of my head. And I've had plenty of people come to my channel and say thank you for the Young CGB series. So they use the term and they don't seem to feel like dirty about it. So I think we'll stick with it until I see something better. This dive down off the top gives me so much more hope for the hand, because when I'm facing red spells, I'm almost certain my Merfolk Herald is going to die. But once I draw a dive down, I can protect it. I'm thinking that I could go in with the Herald and use Chart a Course to build up some resources and not go too far in on my Mist-Cloaked Herald, but I decide that multiple turns of attacking with the Curious Obsession are just a lot better than Chart a Course, which I can play anytime. And our opponent with a Lightning Strike, I dive down in response, and we get in with the Herald right away. Couldn't work out much better than that. I draw Wizard's Retort, which is awesome. And my big concern is that my opponent's going to untap and just snap off another removal spell right away. However, if they're a counter deck, or a deck with a lot of card draw or counter spells, we already got underneath them. And rather than deploy anything else, I'm going to just get my attacks in and protect it with the counterspell. I'm not going to try to play the Curious Obsession or a Chart of Course here. I'm content to protect my Herald as long as I can. Here on end step, the opponent's looking at their hand but not playing anything, which makes me really wonder what they could have. I think anything that would remove the Herald would be playable. Here's an Electromancer. I decide to let that resolve since it can't block the Herald and doesn't kill the Herald. I also go for an opt here, see a Tempest Djinn, and snap that off. As we untap, since I have a counterspell and the mana to play it, I go for another Curious Obsession. I decide to double down on my Herald since it's already going this well. Now I am thinking that my opponent is running maybe more counterspells, but also maybe Essence Scatter, something like that. But it's really hard to tell what they have, as I think if I were in their shoes, I'd do anything I could to prevent that Curious Obsession or this Herald from hitting me. They go through the end step without playing anything and untap 5 cards, Electromancer. They should be able to do just about anything, and what they go for is a Chemister's Insight. For the second time in this event, I say that's fine because it doesn't impact the board. I'm perfectly okay with letting you have cards as long as I get to keep my creature. Now right here is a mistake. I could have gone for a Merfolk Trickster and tapped down the Electromancer and not taken this damage, but I was still looking at their mana available and thinking there might still be a Lightning Strike or something like that involved. If I really believe that, I shouldn't play the Trickster here. But I kind of just convinced myself that it's really an Essence Scatter, something like that, and I wanted to play my Tempest Djinn. And it turns out I'm right, but it's still a risk I didn't have to take. And if I could go back, I would probably just play the Trickster pre-combat, which would draw the counter earlier, but at least then it could have prevented the Electromancer if they'd allowed it. The end result would have been totally the same, by the way. It's just me nitpicking back in time. So my mission here is to leave the Tempest Djinn available, or not the Tempest Djinn, but the Wizard's Retort. So I play the Chart of Course instead of the creatures, knowing I can discard lands safely. I have way too many as it is. So I'm just trying to dig deeper and have more and more ways to protect my Herald and just lean on it harder and harder. It doesn't matter right now if I get out my Djinn or my Deckhand. It doesn't matter if I get out anything else, as long as I protect my Herald. And when Rahl shows up, intending to kill it, we counter Rahl. And we say 5 mana, Planeswalker, no. Not today. The opponent can't take seeing Rahl go to the bin, so they pack it up. And we are rolling right along. I kind of take a moment to be like, wow, 5-0. That's pretty great. Let's see if we can take this thing the whole way. I don't know about you. I'm a decent player. I'm not a great player. In terms of Magic skill, I would rate myself on a 1 to 10, about a 6. Just a little bit better than average. My main focus right now in playing the game, while it used to be about being as good as I can be, my main focus right now is being an entertainer, playing a variety of decks and trying to be informative, and also kind of a teacher, just trying to find teachable moments about the game, both without being too advanced and without being too intro beginner focused, being something in the middle. Anyway, my point about that is that 7-0s don't come up that often for me. I probably have a number of them in a season. I usually have one every week to 2 weeks, maybe average every 10 days. But getting a 7-0 is still something I feel very proud of and excited about when it happens. So this is an easy keep. And even though last time we did this, our creature got lightning bolted, I once again, immediately upon seeing the Lava Runner in the red deck, go in on the Curious Obsessions for the Stormtamer. Because I think the best way that I can win this game, the most likely way that I can win this game, is by getting in multiple hits. The opponent untaps and plays Runaway Steamkin, which I'm very excited about. And I decided that, once again, the best way for me to win this game is to really go for the curve out. And I decided to slam a Tempest Djinn and just try to put as much pressure on my red opponent as possible, because a red opponent under pressure has a much harder time winning the game. Our opponent, upon seeing their situation, decides to launch their Chain Whirler, but that doesn't get them through. It doesn't deal with either creature and leaves them with no good attacks. And at this point they've been brickwalled for a while. So now I have an interesting decision. Exclusion Mage on Runaway Steamkin's a consideration, Merfolk Trickster, Essence Scatter are all pretty good choices. The red burn deck doesn't usually deploy a lot of threats from here, so Essence Scatter may not be needed, but Merfolk Trickster as a tempo swing is huge. So is Exclusion Mage, especially if we can set up Exclusion Mage into Essence Scatter like we can next turn. I decided to put the Curious Obsession on the Stormtamer, because that gets it out of range of a Lightning Strike or a Wizard's Lightning, which my opponent may be holding, hoping to be able to remove it. And not to mention, drawing 3 cards is pretty good. And it also threatens to kill our opponent next turn if they can't kill something. Having seen that I have an Essence Scatter and a Spell Pierce and a Merfolk Trickster, I decide to pass the turn, discard my land, and play Protect the Queen. I decide that when my opponent goes for a spell, what I can't have them doing is using the Runaway Steamkin to make a bunch of mana. If they make a bunch of mana, they may be able to multi-spell their way back into the game by killing something. So I decide that as soon as my opponent goes for a spell and to put a counter on the Steamkin, I'm going to aggressively tap it with the Trickster and leave up a Spell Pierce. I don't know if that's right, because what I end up being worried about playing around is Goblin Chainwhirler, which Essence Scatter could have straight up countered. But Spell Pierce does it too in a different way, forcing my opponent to spend more mana than they want to spend. So my opponent goes for a Wizard's Lightning, and I decide that the course I'm going to take in response to play around Goblin Chainwhirler is deploy a Trickster to tap down the Steamkin, which has the extra added play of preventing more damage to me this turn. And then, after I tap down the Steamkin and it can't make mana anymore, I'm going to go for the Spell Pierce. Because if my opponent pays for the Spell Pierce, then they also don't have the mana for a Lightning Strike, which they may need to kill the Tempest Djinn. They'll have to have exactly another Wizard's Lightning or a Shock if they wish to kill it. So my opponent taps for 2 mana, but then hits the wrong button and the Spell Pierce counters the Wizard's Lightning anyway, even though they added 2 mana to their mana pool. Be careful how you click through that section, my friends. I think you have to click Resolve on the Spell Pierce, and then it'll ask you to pay 2, and that's when you tap the lands. My opponent shame scoops out of frustration, I suppose. It's unclear if they really could have killed the Djinn, or how that would have affected the game. And just like that, we're looking for a 7th win with the deck. A 7th win. A 7-0 run. I can definitely say that I've been lucky. Some of my opponents haven't played well. Some have had very clunky draws. It's been an odd variety of decks, that's for sure. But regardless, it's exciting to take a budget deck that's 2 weeks old with just a handful of mostly common and uncommon wildcards and see if we can take it to a 7-0 in a constructed event. And after 45 seconds, we get paired. We get our little trance dance on. All right. There, and you look at that hand, and it's, again, like the hands we've been getting, this is probably the best one on the play. We can go play your Merfolk Herald, your Mist-Cloaked Herald, enchant it with Curious Obsession, and protect it with Spell Pierce the next turn, and start the double draws. And then we even have a Tempest Djinn to drop if the opponent can deal with one of them. And our opponent on the mulligan there, it's like, wow. Yeah, things couldn't go much righter. I think I would take this hand 10 out of 10 times offered. I don't know what... I think the opponent would have to have like a hand that was like Shock to really give it a hard time. Shock Lava Coil, all in their hand, I guess would pair off against this pretty well. Also, this was meant to be the crafting video where we craft cards and start working on another deck. You'll see in the end, I'm going to kind of spoil what's going to happen a little bit, but rather than play out the whole video, like the whole outro, I might cover some things, but yeah, we decide that while we are going to open some packs and look through our collection and try to decide what to do with our wild cards, I decided that what we're going to do with the series next week is we're going to try to build a deck for each guild from the guilds of Ravnica and see which one we like the best. So there we go. Our opponent plays Forest. We get Herald with Curious Obsession and get right to work, drawing our bonus cards. Our opponent goes with Woodland Cemetery, so at least they appear to have a color that features removal, and they go for Assassin's Trophy right away, which is the right play. And we nail it with a Spell Pierce, which has got to feel so bad. Then we rip Dive Down off the top of the deck, and we swing with the Herald. I think about leaving Dive Down up, as we have against the red decks that we played against before, but against Black-Green, a card I think about is Plague. God, why is it escaping me? Plague something. Anyway, it's a creature that makes you sacrifice a creature as well. I'll remember it the second I'm off the air, and I definitely remembered it when I was recording. But anyway, Plague Crafter. So I didn't want to have to sacrifice either my Djinn or my Herald. If I had to sacrifice, though, I wanted to still have a creature afterwards. So that's why we played into, instead of leaving Dive Down up. Dive Down can't protect the creature from Plague Crafter. Our opponent, though, didn't have Plague Crafter. In fact, had nothing to play with that turn. On turn 4, they go for a Poison Tip Archer. But Departed Deckhand has this extra ability that gives target creature you control unblockable except by spirits. And Poison Tip Archer has reach. It could, and Death Touch. It could normally block and kill the Djinn, but with the ability of Departed Deckhand coming up for the first time ever in my playing experience, we're able to knock our opponent down to 1, draw an extra card, and just leave them in a very bad place where I'm also still holding a Dive Down. And it looks like the dream, the 7-0 is just at hand. How freaking thrilling to me. I'm still pretty happy that we got there using this blue deck. I think it's a very consistent deck, a pretty quick deck. It gets a certain amount of what's called free win equity, where you have god draws the opponents can't beat. But I didn't expect to pull it off like this in Quick Constructed. I think we got some fortunate pairings and some very fortunate draws, and I won't deny that for a minute. I don't expect to 7-0 everything, but it's pretty cool to do it on camera in the Young CGB series for all of you, and pretty uncool, I've got to say, that my mic wasn't on. But that's why I'm going through what I'm going through here, re-recording this whole series, this whole video for all of you. Thundering Spineback, maybe we make a Dino deck someday. 7 wins. Let's get our bonus prizes. 1,000 gold is the big one. I gotta tell you, I was not very happy with the cards, to be completely honest. I don't know where I'm gonna use a Spell Swindle or a Gilded Lotus, 5-color ramp, some ridiculous combo deck. I'm not sure. But then we look and we say, well, okay, I only need 1 more win for a pack, and that's a weekly reward. I don't know if I'm going to get to play this weekend. I might. Maybe we'll do a live Young CGB event, but definitely not guaranteed. I always have plenty of things and options and to figure out with my weekend, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing right now. So I go for 1 more game because I want that pack. I just want that pack. Those packs are 1,000 gold. To let that go and reset would be foolish. Let's get that 15th win and get our pack. And what do I draw? I draw a curve, a ridiculous curve of creatures. And yeah, no Curious Obsession, no Djinn. This is what Patrick Sullivan of the SCG Tour would call a bunch of knuckleheads. A bunch of knuckleheads. If there's Tom Petty in the Heartbreakers, Tom Petty is the Tempest Djinn. The rest of these creatures are the Heartbreakers. Can you name a Heartbreaker? I can't name one of the Heartbreakers. I only know Tom Petty. So then Tom Petty does show up right there to unbreak my heart. Tony Braxton style. And how many musical references, God, can I throw in this? But we just kind of go for a creature curve out, and our opponent goes Duress into Anticipate, which has me fearing a pretty legitimate control deck with a sweeper in their deck. But when I draw a second Tempest Djinn off the top, I decide, especially with sweepers not being for another turn or two, except for Golden Demise, I decide I'm just going to slam the Djinn and go for it. If I get to untap and play a Siren Stormtamer to protect it, great. If not, I get to untap and play another Djinn and just force the opponent to have all the right answers. They do have a cast down, so the Djinn goes away, but that implies to me that they may lack a Ritual of Soot, which would blow up all the creatures of casting cost 3 or less. So I play out the Siren Stormtamer, and I decide to let the turn go. I want to play the Tempest Djinn with protection from the Stormtamer the next turn. If our opponent decides to hold up counter magic, we still have pressure on the board. If the opponent had a Golden Demise, that would be very sad, and is probably the worst case scenario for this situation, but at least I get to follow it with a Tempest Djinn. Same thing with the Ritual of Soot, though I was pretty sure they didn't have it after they played the cast down. The Exclusion Mage is just waiting for them to play another creature, and they go for a Ravenous Chupacabra. They decide to target the Deckhand, which is interesting because it's not a spell, so I could counter the ability with the Stormtamer if I wanted to. However, I want the Stormtamer to protect the Tempest Djinn, not the Deckhand, which is already a very vulnerable creature. And since the Chupacabra can't block either creature, I don't mind that either. So we untap, we play the Djinn with 1 mana open, so the Stormtamer can protect it. Opponent looks around. In the meantime, while they're making their decision, I'll show you. You can see the double CGB here. I decided to put this face over that face so that it wouldn't be distracting, because I have no idea how I could match/read lips my own face for this video. So this is me talking into a mute microphone making this whole video here. And yeah, I'm just gonna cover that up. But just a peek behind the curtain at how I went through to double record this. Now my opponent plays Etrata the Silencer, which I read the whole thing. In a nutshell, Etrata hits you, it exiles a creature, and then it shuffles itself back into the library, which is the big downside. It is unblockable. It is a 3/5, but it's not hexproof. There isn't a lot you can do to protect it. And if the opponent hits you 3 times, they win the game. It's like a weird alternate win con. But looking at this hand, I have Merfolk Trickster and I have Exclusion Mage. Trickster is more risky because the opponent could have a counterspell. So I drop the Exclusion Mage, bounce the Etrata. The opponent can't take it. It completely shatters their will to compete, and they are out of here. So there's that pack, along with 25 more gold. And let's get into our packs. So we still have the 30 packs. I don't know, I still haven't heard why I got them or how I can transfer them, but I decided to spend my gold. I have 5,000 gold to spend on packs, and when deciding what to buy, I decided to get more Guilds of Ravnica because I would like to get some of the Guilds decks going in the near future. I would like to play decks from the Guilds, and the more packs you get of Guilds of Ravnica, the more they kind of fuel themselves. It's a very synergistic set, much like Ixalan was with all the tribal synergies. The more Ixalan you got, the closer you got to playing Ixalan decks. But since Ravnica guilds are so much more powerful than Ixalan decks, the only boosters I need for the foreseeable future are Guilds of Ravnica. We talk a little bit about how much gold I have and how many packs I have to open and how many wild cards I might be able to get from this experience. And then we get into it. So the core pack was a quest pack. The Divination and the Revitalize might be filler somewhere. The uncommon wild card's always good, but the sword, a Sigil Sword of Valerian isn't my style. Equipment that is Night Tribal and is pretty expensive. Bit clunky for me. Next up, I'm really excited about Notion Rain, more wild cards, a Sprouting Renewal, and then we get a Swiftblade Vindicator, which will be great in Boros. So, not a bad pack. Keeping it coming, we have a Boros Challenger, and there's that Plague Crafter, that card we mentioned. Whisper Agent isn't terrible for Surveil. Devious Cover-Up isn't either, but opening the green-white land is always nice. Lava Coil is good for any of our red decks. And we also open a Ritual of Soot, which will be good for any sort of black control we want to do. Next up, we get a Disinformation Campaign and a Circuitous Route. Might help if a ramp deck. We open a Thief of Sanity, and I had forgotten this, but I find out later I did have a second one, so we now have 2 Thieves of Sanity. So expect some Thief of Sanity protected by Dive Down Dimir in our future. Cracking a rare wild card is never a bad thing. 3 wild cards in that pack feels great. A Golgari Findbroker is exactly what you want when you're working on your Golgari deck. The card is pretty great. Response and Resurgence is... I give it an okay. It's about a medium. Our wildcard counter on the side fills up from opening packs, and we get an extra rare wildcard, but we also open our third, as I would see later, Gruesome Menagerie. So I feel like a Gruesome Menagerie Golgari deck might be on the horizon. A Mythic wildcard is there for the taking, and very exciting in our last pack. We don't open those 30 packs because the average player will not have them, so we are going to let those sit. Plenty of people have asked me, can I just have them removed from the account? I've had no reply to a case that I opened, a support ticket that I opened asking about packs being removed from my account. I think they're pretty confused by the question, to be honest. So after looking around the collection, I was going to do crafting. I was going to design some new decks. I just decided to poke around the collection a bit and see what I'm most interested in crafting. But the decision is that we have so many different decks and so many different directions that we could take crafting right now, that what I'm going to try to do is build a deck for each of the guilds in Guilds of Ravnica without crafting anything, and then see which deck is the most complete and which ones have the furthest to go. And then I'll work on the deck that needs the help, that is the closest to being like top tier deck, and we'll work on that. So next week, the plan is to, for each day of the week, try out a different guild. Boros, Izzet, Golgari, Selesnya, Dimir. So that'll be a pretty fun week. And then at the end of the week, we'll pick a winner from the 5 guilds of which deck we like the most, and we'll put some wild cards towards it and build it up even more and get closer to another competitive deck. Our blue deck is plenty of competitive. If we wanted to spend a few more wild cards, we might get more Wizard's Retorts, which is honestly the only thing I think that the deck is missing at this point, is the full playset of Wizard's Retorts. But since the deck just got to 7-0 without them, I think we're okay for the time being. Wizard's Retort is also only used in that deck, whereas if I craft some Sinister Sabotages, they're a very similar card that's used in almost every blue deck. That would just be a smarter craft at the uncommon spot for now. Just looking around the collection, I can see I've got a lot of pieces of Golgari, 3 Gruesome Menageries, Ravenous Chupacabras, of Vraska's Contempt. There's a lot of things I could do to build out Golgari. In red, I almost have like this. I have the core of a mono red deck already. Shocks, Lightning Strikes, Gitu Lava Runners, Goblin Bannerets, various burn spells, Viashino Pyromancer, Rekindling Phoenix. Like there's probably already a somewhat playable red deck I could make. And then if I'm willing to go red mid-range, like Charging Monster Source, Siege Gang Commander, and Demanding Dragon is a lot of powerful stuff. 2 Banefires. We've seen Banefire close out really powerful control decks full of mythic rares that I have no business beating. Looking around green, we have plenty of ramp cards if we want to play some bigger threats, as well as Carnage Tyrant and Pelakka Worm hanging out. The Thorn Lieutenant's a good card. The Elvish Rejuvenators can help us play things, even though we don't have District Guide yet. Galta's is still hanging out, still lurking. 2 Thief of Sanities I'm pretty eager to build around, especially now with a Hostage Taker, Nightveil Predators in there, Notion Rains hanging out. There's a Crackling Drake, a Rawl, and an expansion, so it's looking juicy. There's so many different ways to go right now, and I see plenty of Boros power too and heroic reinforcements. So yeah, just all kinds of really exciting places to take various decks, and I look forward to the deck building challenges next week. We'll try to line them up with the quests that we get and get more gold and continue to build it up, and I'm still really impressed. This is 2 weeks into Arena. We 7-0'd a constructed event. We have one deck that I feel can compete with most of the format, and I'm excited to start working on building around another deck. So the sooner we have 2 decks, 3 decks, multiple decks as a free-to-play player, that just feels like winning. If we can be making good progress, like it took us 2 weeks, I think, to complete the blue deck. If we can complete a deck every 2 weeks, even though that was a very budget-minded deck, mind you, but if we can complete a deck even every 3 weeks, you got to be pretty happy as a player who's not putting any dollars into the game that you're getting to play something pretty close to Magic. So I would just say, I don't remember how long I talk about my decision or what to do here on the end of the video, but I gotta say, I'm a big fan of what this game lets you do. It gets you into playing serious, real, standard constructed Magic or draft Magic, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. In this case, we haven't spent any money to do it on this particular series with the video. Imagine if you were willing to put in $10 and do some drafts. You'd probably get much further than I get right now. I want to say thanks again for the support that the series has received. The enthusiasm around it is awesome. Every time somebody comes to the Twitch chat room and says thank you for Young CGB, it makes my day. So as I overlap the outro, just pretend the music is playing. And from the bottom of my heart, thanks for watching this awkward recording over myself, talking over myself video, and have a wonderful day. Good night.